16 years working in MLB front office, former executive of the year, current insider and analyst for The Athletic, CBS, MLB Network, a man who made some pretty accurate predictions about the Toronto Blue Jays before the season started. It's Jim Bowden. Hey, man.
How you doing?
Happy
Thursday.
Yeah, happy Thursday to you as well. I'm doing okay. Here's what I would like to say. I would have enjoyed had you been coming on today and it was because you were less correct about the Blue Jays start to the season. You know, like if you predicted it incorrectly. And this was a segment where I was going to be like, Jim, how could you think that they would get off to a slow start? You know, that would be much better for me anyway, personally.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, you know, we've seen the same cast, right?
Uh-huh.
We've seen what it's been like the last couple of years, and we don't have the influx of prospects coming up to give hope. And look, pitching and defense is solid, but this is not a lineup that's going to score enough runs in 2024 to be a contending team with teams like the Orioles and Yankees. It's just the reality of it. And now for the Blue Jays, it's time. I mean, it's time to either, if you're not going to sign Bichette and Guerrero, it's time to blow it up and kind of reset here. You got a lot of assets to trade in Guerrero and Bichette and Chris Bassett and a whole bunch of guys you can move. Romano, you can do it. I just don't see a pathway with this farm system and this major league team. I don't see the pathway of being a playoff team again for a while. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of big decisions that have to be made in Toronto.
Yeah, this was always a scary part that we spent a lot of time talking about this offseason when, you know, the Jays came up in trade rumors for Juan Soto. And most people here went, but wait, like they have a Relvis Martinez who's a polarizing prospect and Ricky Tiedemann who hasn't been able to stay healthy and people also find as a little bit polarizing. Like beyond that, there wasn't a lot of immediate help coming that was like high ceiling help. And most people understood that that was the team that they had after the Gabriel Moreno trade specifically. But, you know, you predicted in your 24 predictions column in March that the Jays would start like this and that John Schneider would be the first manager fired. I want to start with that, though, which is if that gets done, it's 3 managers for this front office. They have Mattingly in-house, but it's not – he's supposed to be the offensive coordinator, and it's the biggest failing of the team so far. Like, how does that work optically from a front office standpoint, making a decision like that? Aren't you basically bending the knee and saying that the Ross Atkins era is over as well?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, let's kind of understand that there's a lot of blame to go from top to bottom when you're in this situation. And I think we have to recognize that. Because this is a team that was committed to building the minor league system like they had done in Cleveland, right? They were supposed to be building this thing through development and scouting. Well, where are they? And I think, a lot of times you look at the major league club and you think that's the problem. But the reality is, you look around the diamond and you look up and down the pitching staff, where are all the prospects? Where's all the young players that are developing, right? Where are they? I haven't seen them. And then look, they made a run at Soto, but they didn't have enough to trade for him, right? They made a run at Ohtani, who was going to go to the Dodgers anyway. I get that. So they did try to pick up some younger free agents, which is really what this team needed to do. But, for me, this is not something where you're going to blame one person for this. If you change managers, the Blue Jays aren't going to play any better. Yeah. But that being said, this isn't working. Maybe a different voice can get more out of this team. It's not necessarily going to be a better manager coming in, but maybe it's just a different leadership style that makes a difference. And sometimes you make managerial changes for that as well. Now, Ross Atkins was handpicked by Mark Shapiro. And so he's got to make that decision. Is this the person you wanted to keep leading the team? But I still have a bad taste in my mouth, as you know, from Barrios being taken out of that game in the playoffs. Yeah. And then all of a sudden the manager doesn't take accountability, and then we got finger pointing. That was such a bad vibe, and that, to me, hasn't gone away. That's still a black cloud that's there. And I think change has to happen. You can't just keep running out the same people in your infrastructure and expect things to change. The players are the same, and the managers are the same, and the farm directors are the same, and the scouting directors are the same. Then you're going to get what you have because you had it the last several years.
Yeah, it's so difficult because at the end of that loss, it seems so clear and obvious in this market that there needed to be some major overhauls. And then
Yes.
they just did the complete run it back and not even injecting like meaningful talent into the roster. And of course they went after Shohei Ohtani, but that turned out to be a bit of a fool's errand. Yeah, they were in on Soto, but you mentioned it. They didn't have the prospect capital. Like these are, you mentioned the picks and them developing guys. And I know you can, there's, I don't even know how many rounds there are in a baseball draft. Like maybe it's 24. Like I don't know how many it is. This is their first round pick since they took over. And you tell me if you know any of these players. TJ Zoik, Logan Warmouth, Nate Pearson, Jordan Groshans, Alec Manoah, Austin Martin, who they trade away, Gunnar Hoagland, who they traded away. Like they're completely bereft of any top tier talent that's actually come and helped the roster outside of Manoah, and that's kind of fallen apart. So yeah, I think that this is a team with many, many issues. Certainly the manager is, I would think, one of them, and maybe removing that black cloud, but it's Mattingly who would step in, right? Like if you're talking about a manager change, you can't be Atkins and Shapiro and go and acquire someone from outside the organization, right? Like you don't. Do you have that equity right now, given all of the other parameters of where this team is at and what they've done?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think if you did make a change, you do it in June if the team doesn't turn it around, and then you bring in Mattingly as the interim manager for the rest of the year, and then you do your complete search in the off season when you revamp. But I think you have to address why you keep failing on the first round pick, right? You have to keep addressing that. Why do you keep failing on that first round pick? Why? Still don't understand why people don't. The teams that succeed with the first round pick, right? How the Astros, were doing Correa, and the Cubs back then were doing Bryant, and the Nationals back there were doing Harper, and I'm not comprehending when people look at the Orioles and just see position player, hitter after hitter after hitter, and now they're all in the big leagues. Here's Rutschman, here's Henderson, here's Colton Cowser. You keep taking pictures, and sure, Manoah was great for that 1 year, but where is he now? So I just think you're going to have to draft better this June. And I don't care how you do that. You need to bring in new minds so that you're not making the same mistake. But that's critical to any franchise today. You're not supposed to miss it. It's not like it was 5 and 10 years ago where you're expected to miss your first-round picks. Now with technology and analytics and everything that's there, you're supposed to hit on them. And they're just not. That's a problem. And why is Bo Bichette and Guerrero not hitting? I mean, someone has to take a fall for that. That's your two stars. Now, is George Springer in decline, or why isn't he hitting? Look, I know it's a good defensive team. I get the pitching, but this team needs change. It needs a different voice, and it needs a different culture in the clubhouse. It does. It needs a different vibe. And so I think that Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins have a lot of decisions they have to make between now and July 30th. But standing pat and keeping down this path is going to get you the same result.
Well, again, when it comes to the deciding of the path, like Ross Atkins was the main supporter of this idea, like the big believer of like positive regression. That the team was good enough, that the pitching was good enough, the defense was good enough, that the core players were good enough. And so, yeah, I think like when you're talking about guys to make these decisions, isn't the next big decision not so much like the manager? Isn't it Shapiro making one on Atkins' future? And do you think that could happen in season?
I'm not there to know how involved Mark Shapiro is in the personnel decisions or how involved the different layers of management is. One of the things in the media that we all tend to do is we GM without really understanding the infrastructure. Like how involved is an owner in making a decision or not making a decision, or a president or a vice president or development department or scouting department. So I really, not being in the Blue Jays front office, I really don't know who's making the call, but I don't get the sense that there's a singular person that's making all these decisions. I don't feel like Ross Atkins is making all of these decisions. I think it's a collaborative approach with the Blue Jays front office.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I think it's fair to assess that if you're going to keep fighting for the status quo, then I think change is necessary. Now, if you're sitting in the front office and you're saying, with a different manager, I think we could get different results with these players, then change the manager. And if you don't get good results, then you go home, right? I mean, that's the one thing you can do as a GM. If you think this team is good enough and you think you're underachieving and you think a different leader can win, then make the change now to keep your job, right? Because otherwise it's on you. right? Like if you make a change and you have the exact same results, then it wasn't the manager.
Yeah, I just, again, this would be their third manager after the guy that they handpicked in John Schneider. And if you fire him and the team doesn't improve, I just don't know how Ross Atkins could be in charge of selling the pieces from this team. Like Ross's trade history is not extremely strong. Like you want to talk about the reasons why the Jays have not been great is it's a multitude of reasons. Draft and development was supposed to be one of the hallmarks of this group. It hasn't been. Trades certainly haven't been dominated by the Toronto Blue Jays. Like, again, you go through the entirety of it, and it's like, yeah, the return has been pretty minimal. And even if you look back at other trade deadlines, say when they first came in and they were sellers, right? They didn't get a haul for Stroman. They didn't get a haul for Jay Happ when he was the best starting pitcher on the market. They got like Brandon Drury and an outfielder, I can't remember, somebody who ended up playing with like the Athletics for a while, like a journeyman outfielder. It was just not... Yeah, I guess if you do fire that manager, don't you have to do it with some space ahead of the deadline so that if they don't turn it around, then you make that decision and maybe it's like Shapiro who's calling the shots? Like, how does that work in your eyes?
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all of your assessments are fair, right?
Yeah.
Because you're just throwing facts, right? And so it's hard to argue and it's hard to defend that. I will say if the GM is sitting in that seat, and the player development and scouting department aren't giving you players, it's really hard to make trades.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've been in that position. You got to be more creative at the big league club if you don't have that because you're kind of hamstrung, which makes it tough. But you got to find a way to win anyway. But I think the biggest criticism is why did you think this team was good enough? I mean, pitching and defense alone, maybe, but I think when you looked at this lineup, I mean, it doesn't scare you. It just doesn't. And your two best guys aren't hitting.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's get into...
Yeah, I think it's fair, but I do think change has to come, and I wouldn't be surprised if Mark Shapiro made sweeping changes because honestly, I think that's what the Blue Jays need. I think they needed a different eyeballs. So
you just wrote in your MLB trade piece of too early. I think the title of the article is MLB trades that are way too early. Blue Jays, was your number 2 trade. Blue Jays trade first baseman Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to the Astros for first base outfielder Joey Loperfido and outfield Kennedy Corona. Now, I will admit openly, I have zero clue who those two guys are, but I will say that it just even reading the names, I went, God, that feels really underwhelming for a guy like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. This is a two-parter. One, do you actually think the Jays are in a position where this year they would consider a Vladdy trade if they do become sellers? And two, what do you perceive is value to be? Like, is this something, like when you're looking at this, like what kind of prospects are these? Because that feels like you're not getting any guarantees back.
Yeah, and you're not. And so here's the reason I wrote that particular trade, right? For both sides. First of all, Houston needing to recognize, and I wrote it before Jose Abreu was optioned out, but I wrote that to say Houston needs to move on from first base. They need to go get a first baseman, whether it's Vladimir Guerrero or Pete Alonso. They have a big need there. Number 2, I wrote it for Toronto's sake, which is sign the player, because if you don't, you got to trade him. Like you're out of time. Now if you trade him, you got a year and a half, and if you wait to the end of the year, it's a walk year. You're not getting anything for him. So you need to step up if you're the Blue Jays front office, in my opinion, and sign Bichette and Guerrero, and put this conversation away. Don't have it here. That's what I would do. I like both players. If you can't sign either player, then you got to trade them by July 30th. You don't keep fooling yourself. You're not going to want to just walk away. You got to do it with the Padres. The Padres didn't want to trade Juan Soto, but you know they did what they had to do, right? And I think that if you, as barren as the Blue Jays farm system is, your best return is going to be between now and July 30th. And you need players. You need quantity, right? I mean, if you're trading Guerrero, you really want to get 5 guys back if you can.
Yeah.
But again, it's a first baseman that's not hitting either. And if the Blue Jays can't sign him long term, is the team trading for him thinking they're going to get him long term, or they think it's a year and a half? They're going to think it's a year and a half.
Jim, as always, thank you so much for your perspective and your time. Take care, man.
Take care. Thanks.